In this day and age, it's pretty common for people, as soon as they wake up, every day in their daily routine, they've got to check their Facebook, they got to check their Twitter, their Instagram, they got to see what's on YouTube for the day. But do you ever just step back and think, what's the point of this all? And do I really need any of this? Now, I've listened to a lot of people talk about their experience with quitting social media, how we spend way too much time on it, and how it really affects your mental health because you're constantly seeing what everybody else is doing and you're constantly comparing ourselves to others. But one thing that doesn't seem to be talked about very much is that the internet just kind of is making people go crazy. So let's talk about the news. Now, the news has been around for longer than the internet has. People have always spread news by word of mouth, or by newspaper, or eventually by radio, and by TV, and now by internet. But early on, it was kind of one of those things that was like, yeah, it's necessary, but it's not really something that is super profitable. Now, in most competitive industries, if one company starts to do something really well, then another company has to do it even better to try and draw in more customers to their product. But when it comes to news, how do you improve your product of news? Technically, your whole job is just reacting to what is going on in the world. Well, you can't always keep a consistent career going off of that, because what if there's no news? What if nothing exciting is happening? Well, eventually people started having to spice it up a little bit. All these different media stations started to figure out that if you sensationalize things a little bit more, then it gets people more interested. If you tell a happy story, you might draw in a few hundred eyes. But if you tell a tragic story or something very anger-inducing, that's where you start to bring in tens of thousands of people. And so over the years, all of these media companies have just been trying to one-up each other, one after another. I gotta make this story seem crazier and crazier, no matter what. But I think we've reached the point where news is kind of at its peak insanity, where people will not only drastically exaggerate everything that's going on. At this point, there are even some places that are just completely making up news stories, things that never even happened, just doing absolutely whatever it takes to get those clicks. And this is where the topic of this video really comes in, is that all of this sensational news going on all over the place is just causing people to lose their minds. And that's where I come in to say, the internet is not real life. Now, to anybody who's been watching the news over the past, 3 or 4 years at least, they're basically always trying to panic you. Especially last year, they're like, the virus is here, don't go outside, everyone's gonna die, stay in your homes, we can't go anywhere. But if you just walked outside, you can just walk to the park, everything seems totally normal. Then you turn on the news and, oh, there's violent riots everywhere, people are dying, there's people getting shot, it's just so unsafe to be anywhere. And you just walk outside and everything just looks completely normal. Now, I'm not saying that you should remain completely in the dark. It is good to keep up with things that are going on. You don't want to just be completely ignorant and just going along with the flow. I mean, that's one of the reasons that so many corrupt politicians just keep getting reelected. But you also just can't be so fixated on what's going on in the media. Now, I've been kind of a victim of this for the past few years. You know, I'm subscribed to a lot of YouTube channels. And for so long, you're subscribed to like 15 or 20 different news and politics channels. Every time there's a new story, every channel is talking about it. You're listening to the same story 10 different times and hearing all the different perspectives. They're constantly bringing up the most drastic things that are happening. And when you just get so locked into this for so long, you just think like, we're all gonna die, like the world is coming to an end. But again, you can just walk outside, walk to the park, and everything seems fine. Now, I took a vacation a couple weeks ago. I just spent an entire week just going to theme parks, just exploring places I've never been, riding roller coasters, and it was a really great time. I enjoyed pretty much every minute of it. But one of the most enjoyable parts that I wasn't even expecting was just that I completely threw out my daily routine. So like I said at the start of this video, most people, like as soon as they wake up, they're checking all of their social media sites. They gotta see what's on Facebook and YouTube and all that. But for an entire week, I just didn't watch like any YouTube. I didn't really look at Facebook hardly at all. I paid no attention to what anybody else was doing. I was just living in the moment. And it just felt so refreshing to just not have any of that on my mind, to just not be thinking about the news and just enjoy real life. I mean, before I left on this trip, I'd be watching maybe 15 to 20 different videos every day about whatever's going on in the news. But then as soon as I came back, I mean, obviously I fell way behind and I'm seeing all these videos and I'm just like, I don't need to click on this. Like, what am I gaining from following all this drama? Like, it's all of media these days is competing to grab your attention. And like I said, they will dramatize everything. They'll make everything sound way worse than it is. And one major thing that I talked about in my video about media manipulation is that so many media companies or just any YouTube channels or anybody reporting news can find a story of pretty much anything they want and report on that. And with the internet, it makes people feel like they are much closer to the actual event that's happening. But there are over 300 million people in the US. So if you're showing me a video or you're telling me something really bad that happened somewhere in this country of hundreds of millions of people, like, yeah, I mean, bad things are gonna happen every day. It's always been like that and it always will be. But especially now that politics have become so polarizing and people are just so on edge and everyone hates each other, people are always looking for that one story that's gonna confirm their bias. And you know, I'll just go ahead and say it. I think that the whole George Floyd thing was overblown a million times over what it should have been. I mean, it's just an example of people who are looking for a reason to get angry. And when news sites see something like that, they're like, ooh, this is gonna be a cash cow. We're gonna make so much money from this. Like, oh man, you have no idea just how much all these news sites like CNN and MSNBC were just foaming at the mouth when they saw George Floyd's video. Like, you know, they were ecstatic to see that video because they were like, oh man, now we can make so much money spreading so much rage bait. We can turn this into a bigger story, so every time a police officer hurts somebody, we can try to make everyone freak out and convince them that the world is ending, that all cops are coming to kill us all. Same thing with COVID too. I mean, it might be controversial to say that the response to COVID was pretty overblown, but you can thank the media for trying to scare everybody, making it sound like it was the worst thing that's ever happened in human history. And so you have the people who listen to that stuff religiously, compared to the people who are a bit skeptical and think that this might not be as crazy as the news says it is. And so then you've got those two people fighting, so now you've got the culture war even escalating even more. Like, I'm pretty sure anybody who's been on Twitter has seen just how aggressive and toxic the whole website can be. Now, I've never been that into Twitter. I know people waste their whole life on it and will get into fights with anybody on there. And I just think it's an all-around disgusting website, and I hate every bit of it. Like, it's crazy just how nasty everybody gets. And if you spend so much time on Twitter, you start to get the feeling like the whole world is just all these people fighting, and everyone hates each other, and the culture war is just everywhere, everyone's involved. But again, if you log off, just walk outside, walk to the park, everything seems fine. You know, it's kind of funny to think about 30 years ago, nobody had phones, nobody had internet, nobody had social media, none of that stuff even existed only 30 years ago. I mean, even when I was a little kid, the internet was barely even a thing. I mean, you look at people today, and they pretty much cannot live without the internet or without their smartphones. But then you look back 30 years, and people did just fine. They didn't need it. And it's kind of just weird to think about how far things have changed in such a short period of time. Because, I mean, if you even look back or think back to like the 80s or the 90s, you're like, what did people do for fun? They didn't really have the internet, they didn't have like all the video games and all of the convenient media that we have now. I mean, I guess people lived much simpler lives back then, but I wouldn't say that people are happier now that they have all of this extra media. But to finish this off, I guess what I want to say is that if you ever feel like the world is just so toxic and everything's coming to an end and everything is so terrible, sometimes you just gotta get a different perspective on life. Sometimes you just need to change your daily routine, cut out a lot of things that are causing all of that, and just go outside and walk to the park.